Welcome, everybody, to the Summit Series. My name is Janet Lalonde, and I'm the Vice President of Business Program Delivery at Payments Canada. I'm going to be your host for today's webinar, which is focused on payments accelerating economic growth. We'll commence the proceedings today with a land acknowledgement, which serves as a crucial step in the journey towards truth and reconciliation by honoring the history, rights, and contributions of Indigenous peoples. I wish to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. Our Ottawa office is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Our Toronto office is located on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. Ottawa and Toronto, among other cities from which we are all joining today, are home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. I recognize and honor their historical presence on this land on which I am privileged to work and live. So before I kick off our conversation today, on behalf of myself and Payments Canada, I'd like to thank all of our attendees today for taking the time to join us. We will try to reward your engagement with a lively and informative discussion. And between our topic and this esteemed panel that we have, we believe we have all the ingredients to deliver on that. As is customary, we're going to start off with a roundtable discussion, and we will save time at the end to answer your questions. So please use the Ask the Speaker box on the right side of your screen, and we'll try to cover as many questions as time permits. It's become a tradition for us to do this webinar at the beginning of each year to discuss what's in store for the upcoming year and beyond. So coming out of another year of transformation across the payments ecosystem, I am super excited to have a great panel lined up for today. Joining me are Abraham Tachjian, Chief Regulatory Affairs Officer at Brim Financial. We have Rebecca Tascona, Chief Operating Officer, Canadian Personal Business Banking at BMO, and Kathleen Woodard, Head Banking Industry Advisory Americas for Microsoft. So I'm going to hand it over to each of our panelists for a moment just to give a brief introduction, and then we will dive right into the questions. So Abraham, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Janet. First of all, it is a privilege and an honor to be here today. My name is Abraham Tachjian. I lead regulatory affairs at Brim Financial. We are a full-stack modern technology company that enables our partners, such as banks, fintechs, and credit unions, to roll out cards and payment products.
Thanks, Abraham. Rebecca?
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Rebecca Tascona. And I lead, I previously led North American payments and products for BMO Financial Group, Treasury and Payment Solutions. But more recently, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Personal and Business Bank. BMO Financial Group is a North American financial organization, and we help clients of all sizes, retail, business banking, commercial, capital markets clients, wealth management clients. Great to be here.
Thank you. And Kathleen.
Thanks, Janet. I'm Kathleen Woodard. I lead the industry advisory team focused on the Americas, focused on banking for Microsoft. I'm pretty sure everybody knows who Microsoft is, so I'm not going to introduce Microsoft, but would say I'm based here in Canada. I've got industry advisors who help shape innovation for new workloads, whether it's AI or other innovation across the US, Canada, and Latin America. And I'm an ex-banker of 26 years. So very happy to be here.
Thank you. So let's dive right in. 2025 was another big year in payments. The stage is set for a new era of innovative payment solutions that combine data, speed, and safety to help Canadians and their businesses thrive. So I'm going to turn to the panel, and what I want to ask is what these developments mean for your organization, the payments ecosystem, and more broadly to businesses and to consumers. So I'm going to start with Abraham.
Thanks, Janet. I think it'd be helpful to kind of contextualize our conversation with a little quick overview of some of the major developments that really impacted the payments ecosystem over the last year in Canada. Now, given that you're our host, I would be remiss if I wouldn't mention the expanded membership into Payments Canada with the recent amendments to the bylaws and last week's announcement of Brim Financial, shameless plug, including 4 of our other peers joining Payments Canada as new members. And that is a significant milestone in terms of policy development and membership in Canada's preeminent payments infrastructure. I think that new cohort of members brings new voices from a demographic that they serve and just allows for a greater level playing field and competition among the industry. Now, in addition to that, the membership opens the door to potentially having access to the RTR, which is, I think, another major development in the payments ecosystem over the last year, given the significant progress Payments Canada has made towards a go live date. So I think when you combine membership into Payments Canada and the eligibility to join the RTR, I think you're opening the door to a new cohort, a new group of new payment service providers that can offer Canadians a variety of new products and services. I'd add to those one of the preconditions to joining Payments Canada, as well as some other organizations, and that being the Retail Payment Activities Act, otherwise known as the RPAA. It essentially oversees payment service providers, fintechs, however you want to call them, generally any organization that has anything to do in the movement of money. Now, this is significant because for many years, those payment service providers kind of fell into a bit of a regulatory gray zone. And now, under the oversight of the Bank of Canada, they're properly regulated with operational risk and incident management requirements, as well as fund safeguarding requirements. But separate to those policy and compliance requirements, I think the major takeaway from the RPAA is the fact that it opens doors to new partnerships and new organizations. Take the Payments Canada membership, for instance. Organizations that are applying have to be registered under the RPAA. Similarly, organizations that want to have access to Interact e-transfer, the RPAA is a precondition. So in addition to those simple compliance requirements, which aren't simple at all, I shouldn't use that term, I think the net benefit coming out of that, including for organizations such as Brim and other fintechs, is that it sets a precursor, one of the conditions, if you'd like, for accessing greater infrastructure. I think the other major point from a policy development perspective is from the open banking side. Something I have a personal bias in, given my past role as the open banking lead with the Department of Finance. And so in November, with the budget announcement, I think we had 2 major considerations that really impacted the payments ecosystem. The first was with respect to the governance of the system, moving from the FCAC over to the Bank of Canada. But in parallel to that, I think what was really striking was the government's announcement to expand the scope of the system beyond just read access, but to include write access. And that's just general parlance for the ability for an organization with their consumers' permission to go into their account, move money, essentially do things, right? And so the logical example for that is payment initiation. So the government set a target of 2027. And when you take a step back and you overlay write access along with the timeline of the RTR, suddenly we are looking at potentially the convergence of 2 major projects that we've been working on in the Canadian financial policy landscape happening at relatively around the same time. So that's considerable for a lot of financial organizations. And finally, I think if I took another step back, I think what's really significant is the role the Bank of Canada plays now in overseeing fintechs and perhaps a quasi-competition mandate. You know, generally the bank's responsibilities have primarily been to contain inflation at a certain level, but suddenly it's overseeing the RPAA, it's overseeing open banking, and it's overseeing stablecoins. So a significant expansion of its mandate beyond just inflation, but also to regulate really core payment services as well as fintechs.
Thanks, Abraham. And also, let me offer my congratulations on Brim's new Payments Canada membership status. We are very excited to start working more closely with you and your colleagues at Brim. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I'll move to Rebecca next. So Rebecca, I guess, just looking at, payment solutions that combine data, speed, safety, what do these types of developments mean for you and for your organization?
Well, I would echo what Abraham said, and certainly the budget provided a lot more clarity on some of the parameters, which is really helpful to our clients and to the players in the space. But when I think about 2025, I mean, there were so many things that continue to evolve in the payment space. I mean, every week there was a new headline, and many multi-year projects that came to fruition. And taking just even a North American lens, like the increase in APIs, embedded banking, the news with FedNow, ISO, obviously a lot of news headlines around stable coins, tokenized deposits. And at the end of it all, like also some very big announcements around some next gen rails that have been modernized. So there wasn't really a single area that did not have something that involved like moving it forward. What that means for our customers really is like they need a lot of support understanding how this knits together and what it means for their business model, quite frankly. When we talk to our clients, it's really about, they want the new rails are great, but how does it integrate with everything else that I'm doing, their business model? So we spend a lot of time translating what the capability is, because not everyone is a payments expert, like the folks that are on the phone or joining this call. Lots of our clients need help understanding how to bring this to life and what's the benefit to them, and how can their business models evolve, whether it means access to liquidity faster, better fraud monitoring, things like that. And so we spend a lot of time translating, but it certainly is a very exciting time for the industry and for our clients as well. When you think about the benefits, at the end of the day, the business clients that we have, it's all about how do they automate? How do they integrate? How do they get access to their payments, their receivables at way faster pace, real-time cash flow? Like it just really helps with the transparency, the visibility into their own businesses, and allows them to take their cash and put it to work at a faster pace. For the consumer, it really is about access again to transparency and their own data, but it's also about making sure that they have better real-time monitoring, fraud monitoring, protecting them, and allowing them to unlock, use cases that they weren't privy to before. As much as all these announcements are exciting, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we have to have as many great announcements in the fraud and protecting our institutions space as well, because real time is different. We know from the behavior of other payment rails, and the client education and the consumer education that's required, but also what organizations such as Brim, such as BMO, such as Microsoft need to do to protect the ecosystem and the clients is accelerating at even greater speeds.
Thanks, Rebecca. And we'll round out this question with some thoughts from yourself, Kathleen.
Maybe just to pull together these threads, because I think Abraham and Rebecca did an awesome job kind of outlining the massive degree of change that I think the whole industry is experiencing. And from a Microsoft lens, I would say there's kind of two things that we think about all the time. One is how do we help to support and accelerate innovation, but also how do we be mindful of the risks that are going to be inherent with the pace of change and the technology, with everything that Rebecca just outlined in terms of, with RTR becomes great advantages, but also increased risk, just in terms of the acceleration of fraud that we're seeing across the industry with new tools, even beyond just RTR. Obviously, AI and agentic AI, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, has really changed the game there. I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug, because I do think Canada should feel pretty great about the things that Abraham outlined, because when you think about these things converging, you've got, RTR landing, you've got open banking with the ability to really change the landscape for consumers. that's really an indication that Canada is really trying to step up the game around competition and around really being consumer focused. And as a result, we just announced a few weeks ago, a $19 billion investment into Canada. And so with that, we are investing in new data centers. We are investing in new sovereign Canada landing zones, and making sure that we are helping to support the infrastructure that's going to be required for all of the ecosystem to build on top of this. And so that's a pretty big announcement. If you put that into context, I think the equivalent for the Canadian government was just under 3 billion. Microsoft's investing 19 billion. And this is very targeted. This isn't an idea, but this has been done in partnership with the government. So that's kind of one big impact that I would say as we think about all these changes converging. We need to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to support that. But I also think, and I think it's really important, Rebecca raised that before, I think we have to really touch on the fact that these changes, as well as the geopolitical landscape, the acceleration of AI models, all of these new paradigm, I'm going to call it, is raising new questions around trust, around liability, and around security. And I think right now we are advantaged in Canada that centralized fraud services are built natively into the real-time rail platform through Payments Canada, and that is, I think, a really strong message and a strong capability that we want to leverage. But I think there's also lots of unanswered questions. And so I think, for the entire ecosystem, I think it's going to require a degree of collaboration that probably we haven't seen before. I think the fact that we're going to have new fintech entrants, hopefully creating more competition, as well as more use cases that are going to be very focused on delivering value in a very fast way. I think that's good for the industry. So I'm pretty excited about the future, but as I think we're all acknowledging, this is not simple. It is quite complex. And so it's going to really require, multiple levels of partnership and thoughtfulness in order to deliver real value from the platform.
Thank you, Kathleen. A number of you have already referenced the real-time rail, the RTR, and it's hard to talk about payment innovation, obviously, without talking about real-time payments. The RTR is a new national payment rail that's under development right now at Payments Canada. I can't imagine there's many folks involved in this session today that don't know something about it already. The RTR will allow funds to move from payor to payee in seconds, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year with no scheduled downtime. It's going to provide immediate transaction by transaction settlement between financial institutions and immediate confirmation and irrevocability from an end user perspective once payments are confirmed. The RTR is going to provide foundational infrastructure that supports richer data, ISO 20022 messaging, and of course, as Abraham did mention, participation by a broader set of regulated entities, which is all very exciting. So I'm interested to understand from the panelists a little bit more about how you see the role of real-time payments reshaping the broader payments ecosystem, and what innovative opportunities do you think payments leaders should prioritize to drive value in the space of real-time payments? And I'm going to start this time with Rebecca.
Well, it's real-time payments are no longer a feature, like they are table stakes now, and they are reshaping every part of the payments ecosystem. And they're really, I think, igniting imagination around how to leverage this capability. Particularly for us, many of our clients are North American or global in nature, and they've seen the benefits of real-time payments in other jurisdictions. They're very excited about this capability coming to Canada. I think once it's available, like they will bring the use cases of how they've experienced it or used it in other jurisdictions. It's very exciting from that perspective. I think the thing that is really important for us all to remember, is no single player owns real-time payment innovation. Look at the consortium of very smart people and companies that have been required to bring this to life. And congratulations again to Payments Canada Interact, because it's almost here and it's going to be amazing when it is. But it really requires a lot of innovative thinking across the entire ecosystem. And we have to, for our Canadian ecosystem to continue to be competitive and move with pace. And that's a critical piece, move with pace, because the world is evolving at such rapid speed. It's going to require even more collaboration than we've been doing. And we have to get very comfortable with that. And that we're all going to bring different strengths to the table. And we're going to talk about partnerships later, but really like the ability to leverage the capabilities that we all bring and partner in different ways is going to be table stakes for the next 50 years of the payment ecosystem in Canada. But when you think about what are the innovative opportunities, I mean, I would just bring it back to our clients. And, you know, once you explain what real-time payments can do for them, it would be co-create with them. Take a look at their ecosystem of what they're doing, how they do their business, and use cases are going to fall out of that. And that's how we're going to provide value. We're going to provide value to help Canadian companies reshape their business models and protect, obviously, the end consumer at the same time. And that's where the value is going to be created.
Thanks, Rebecca. I couldn't agree with you more on your comment that real-time payments are table stakes. You know, and what seems cutting edge in the moment sometimes, you know, in a very short amount of time becomes the new normal, right? So maybe I'll go to Abraham next and see if you have a perspective on, you know, how you see the role of real-time payments reshaping the ecosystem.
Thanks, Janet. I wouldn't focus specifically on use cases. I think Rebecca did a pretty good job of giving us an overview of what the capabilities can deliver. And, you know, realistically, there's plenty of precedent in other jurisdictions that can show what the potential of real-time payment rails can deliver to consumers, to businesses. I'd like to take a bit of a different perspective because, you know, Canadians, they don't necessarily care about, you know, specific infrastructure. What they care about are the capabilities, the convenience, and the features that payments offer in their lives, be it, you know, gig economy workers, SMBs, paying, you know, their suppliers, or anywhere else where the movement of money is important. So I think the focus, from my perspective, is to enable those capabilities, to enable those features. And I think inherently you can do that by creating greater competition, right? Creating an opportunity for more providers to actually leverage this infrastructure. I don't like to get bogged down on justifying the objective of infrastructure with use cases, because the challenge with that is that use cases evolve. I think what we're doing a pretty good job of is laying the infrastructure to be able to build on, to be able to innovate and evolve. And I think Payments Canada has done a very good job in getting the RTR near the finish line. And I think that infrastructure is going to help us really navigate the payment ecosystem. And so the perspective I like to take is more from the context of competition, in the sense that the RTR, coupled with Payments Canada membership, as well as some of the other elements that I described in my opening monologue, if you'd like, I think it creates a really good opportunity for the payments ecosystem in Canada, between incumbents, credit unions, and newcomers, with a recent admission to Payments Canada, to really leverage this great infrastructure to deliver greater capabilities to Canadians, perhaps importing some of the good features we're seeing in other jurisdictions, but layering on a uniquely Canadian perspective, but importantly, contributing to our competition on a global scale, right? We often talk about how far behind we were on open banking. You know, we're almost there. Similarly, we're almost at the finish line with the RTR. So I think the contribution from the payment ecosystem perspective is, on the one hand, increasing competition within the market, providing consumers with greater choice, greater capabilities, and better prices, which is inherent to competition. And importantly, making sure that our international competitiveness and our position as an international leader in the financial ecosystem remains.
Thank you. And then we'll let Kathleen weigh in on this one too.
Yeah, would just maybe just keep it brief because I agree with everything that has been said, but I would also take a lens that, that you're right, Canadians don't really care about the infrastructure that's going to be seamless. But if the real opportunity from the rails is beyond kind of fast and seamless, and it is about the new use cases that, we haven't really discovered right now. And, if you think about just all of the data rich ISO capabilities and possibilities that are going to come, I don't think we can even fully, predict what is going to be started up, what's going to be the innovation that's coming from that. But foundational, before even focusing on the consumers, I think is really about trust. And I think it's about just enabling that the fraud and the security, like we all have to make this very successful. And that is the foundation before we think about any sort of going fast and going, into lots of innovation. I think making sure that all participants in the ecosystem are really investing in the right kind of fraud services, security services to make sure that this is going to be as robust and as secure as possible, I think is job one, quite frankly, for everybody. And then I think then you build on top of that. And so, all of the possibilities around automating reconciliation, personalizing services, getting insights, for merchants that otherwise were previously not possible, all of that is going to be goodness. It's all going to be, I think, enabled. But I think, this is totally agree. We've been talking about this for a while. It's not just a new rail. This is actually a real new foundation. We're going to all be building on top of this over, hopefully, the next decade to come. And so I think getting the how right really matters right now in this moment.
Thank you. So I think we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about another trend driving speed and security in payments, and that is, of course, the use of artificial intelligence. AI is being leveraged to create more personalized transaction experiences. So I'm interested to hear from each of the panelists how you see applied AI redefining the future of payments. And I'm going to start this time with Kathleen.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, so maybe if I just sort of back up and a little bit just in terms of what we're seeing across the globe, and particularly in Americas, we have introduced this concept of the frontier firm. And frontier firm meaning that organizations are very focused on their business strategy and the outcomes they're trying to drive, but recognizing the fundamental shift that has happened with the technology is such that organizations have to put AI at the center as an enabler, not as the outcome, but as the enabler in order to drive the kind of and achieve the outcomes at the pace that is going to be happening in the future. And so we talk about kind of three levels of the frontier firm. The first is we believe every employee in every enterprise and every consumer in the future, maybe not today, but in the future, is going to have an AI assistant. If you think about ChatGPT right now has 700 million active users weekly. And so this concept that everybody is going to have their own kind of personal assistant that are supporting them, we are starting to see, quite frankly, in payment operations, in fraud and AML, this is already having an impact. And so, back office analysts using, a co-pilot or an assistant, AI assistant to summarize exceptions or generate reconciliation reports. Many of these things that took hours are now being done in minutes. And at Microsoft, we're customer zero. So our treasury team piloted an AI assistant for reconciliations. We saw a 22% reduction in handling time per account. This is happening in large, small institutions as people are kind of working on that phase one. The second level is where you really start to think about agentic AI. And agentic AI is obviously AI that is no longer just providing information, but is also now taking action. And in this phase, we talk about humans working with digital colleagues. And it is our belief, and we're already starting to see it across the industry, is that organizations are now starting to think about human labor and digital labor, and how they are going to be bringing on digital colleagues to do some of the tasks that previously they could not operate at scale in order to achieve. So fraud operations, sifting through all the millions of transactions, surfacing anomalies, drafting the SARs that everybody has to do. In this situation, digital agents or agentic AI is not replacing humans, but they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And so they are acting as an AI colleague. And there's lots of implications in terms of, how you think about that, how you design your organization. And then the third phase is, and I would just say in terms of the landscape right now, most organizations are already in phase one. They're thinking about how do they enable AI across the organization. They are starting to experiment with phase two and starting to think about, like we're seeing large enterprises in Canada and across the globe, think about how are they going to manage a multitude of agents that are being built by themselves as well as by some of the providers. Phase three, though, is true autonomous agentic AI. And that is really about starting to think about how do you build autonomous business processes. And so, where humans set high-level direction and constraints, but AI agents are executing across the entire workflow. And so, one of the biggest opportunities here, and I know, it's become a thing that everybody's talking about, is agentic commerce. And so in this, just to make it real. So, let's say you want to buy a bike for your child, you're super busy, you're busy with work, you don't really care what kind of bike it is, you just want to buy the best one for the value. And so you might go to ChatGPT or Copilot and ask for advice. But you're still right now kind of clicking through merchant sites to pay. Very soon, there is going to be the possibility, and again, there's lots of questions from a regulatory perspective, but the possibility for you to say, Copilot, find me the best bike for my child under $500 and go ahead and buy it for me. And so we will have these autonomous agents with the capabilities to be able to handle everything. So this is searching, comparing, checking out, using the saved payment credentials without handing off to a website. And so there's been lots of experiments going on across the industry. Microsoft has experimented. We've seen positive results. People are much more likely to buy if they have an assistant helping them. The big payment networks have obviously introduced frameworks to help with agent-initiated payments. And so Visa introduced Trusted Agent Protocol. We've got MasterCard with their Agent Pay. But fundamentally, all of this means really big questions that we have to think about as an industry. So trust and consent are paramount. How do I know my AI agent won't overspend or buy the wrong thing? How's a merchant verify that an agent is genuinely authorized by the customer? How do you really make sure that you've got the legal frameworks in place in terms of understanding liability? So I think, security is a big one. There's going to be lots of opportunity in terms of hackers. Encryption and tokenization are going to be, really, really necessary to be airtight. And then finally, with all of this, there's also the explainability. So what we've seen is we've started to introduce AI, and especially in financial services, I think that relationship with regulators and getting the teams comfortable around, do we have the degree of observability and explainability in order to know why AI picked one product or another is a really big one. And last thing that I just want to say on this, I know everybody recognizes it, but this is going to fundamentally reshape the industry. And it's really important that I think, and I'm seeing it, obviously everybody is thinking about it right now and experimenting with it right now, because this isn't science fiction. This is something that I think is going to unfold over the next kind of 12 to 24 months. And so if you think about it, this is really about making sure that the enterprises that are not disintermediated, that, when you're thinking about kind of that shopping experience, are you going to be behind the AI assistant? Is that all that the consumer is really going to see? And how do you make sure that you maintain relevance? So there is a lot of questions on this topic. This is still very nascent, something that we are actively working with all the participants and thinking about it. But the big thing I would just say here is this is not one of those moments when you can't not, when you can go slow. You can go slow just in terms of how you implement it, but you have to be thinking about it. You have to be experimenting, and you have to be getting the organization comfortable with it. Because I do think this is one of those things where if you have a chat GPT with 700 million users and you have a large enterprise that is, are some of the big players that already start thinking about how do they make sure that their AI assistant gets surfaced up with some of these queries. Are you, as an enterprise, as an organization, going to be completely irrelevant? So I don't mean to be a doomsayer, but I think there's big questions, big implications in terms of how the industry is going to transform.
Thanks, Kathleen. I mean, that's incredibly fascinating and really thought-provoking as well. Wondering if Rebecca, did you want to add anything?
I think we all just need to pause and think about the world that she's just thinking. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, she's right. This is like the future is here. I don't even think we can conceptualize what the world's going to look like in 5 years because it's moving so quickly. I asked my Copilot, how I should respond. No, I'm just kidding. But all I'll say is I agree with the comments around you have to start experimenting. And it's one thing to deploy it in your company, but then you have to actually make sure people are thinking about how to use it, how to bring, it really needs to be leader led, is what I've discovered. You have to encourage experimentation within safe parameters, but also set the expectation that this is here to augment how we do our work so we can focus on the higher value work as well, right? But from an AI perspective, I mean, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the power of AI and what we're going to see and what we are already seeing around protecting and detecting fraudulent activity at a pace that a human could not. We need these tools. These are tools that are designed and will be designed to protect organizations that instill trust, because we're going to be able to quickly identify where something's amiss. But it's one of, I would say, the first lines of defense when we talk about how to create a risk culture that we have to start using if we're not already, because the power is in all the data that's there and being able to connect the dots quickly.
Yeah, I think it's that 12 to 18 month horizon that you referenced, Kathleen, that for me, I find incredibly eye-opening, right? That it's going to be that when we have this session next year, it's going to be the agentic commerce that is going to be the table stakes, right? Yeah, Abraham, you have anything that you want to add on the AI topic before we move on?
Yeah, look, I think it's been covered fantastically. I think in terms of opportunities, one of the angles that I think has the most promise, perhaps on the more boring side in terms of what's happening in the background with respect to the payments transaction. I think Rebecca made a very good point with respect to fraud and how fast fraud evolves today, and the ability of AI to actually be ahead of it, to recognize patterns that humans or existing data models may have, challenges recognizing. So I think that's really going to instill confidence, like we talked about earlier, and trust in this mechanism, if you'd like to call it that. And I think that'll lead to greater adoption. From another perspective, I think it's really going to empower consumers with respect to how they pay. We had a great example Kathleen was giving with respect to agentic AI and how merchants could be potentially disintermediated by not being the front end of the transaction, right? You've spent all this time and money optimizing search engines to get people on your website with a lovely experience, and suddenly that's completely disintermediated with an AI agent that summarizes a product for you and actually executes the transaction without you actually going on the website. So from a certain degree, it empowers consumers in terms of saving time, but there's also a risk for merchants and other payments companies that offer payments tools as well as merchant tools to make sure that part of their business isn't displaced. But at the end of the day, that really empowers consumers to make decisions faster and perhaps focus in on what's the best payment method. My friends that know me as a huge rewards guy. And so I love to make sure that every dollar I spend gives me maximum value between cashback, between the airlines points. And I think one of the great examples, at least personally for me, from a selfish perspective, is having an AI agent that actually helps me spend. to make sure that I'm getting maximum amount from every dollar I spend, from a rewards perspective, from a consumer protection perspective, or a variety of other perspectives. And I think those tools are really going to kind of erode the moats that exist from a product competition perspective, where consumers may not necessarily switch because of challenges related to that, but you have an AI agent within a certain framework that facilitates that transaction for you, facilitates switching, allows money to be moved between accounts while you're asleep, right? Which again, I'll focus in on the competition angle again. That's really going to bring it up. So I can't imagine, like my other panelists, what 5 years down the road will look like. I'm just hoping selfishly I have more travel points.
Thanks, Abraham. So I want to talk for a minute about partnering and partnerships. I think, as is evident just from our discussion over the first 40 minutes here, the pace of change and the amount of complexity in the payments environment is significant, and it is going to require partnerships for organizations to be able to keep up. So how can we ensure that we're addressing current and future market needs through effective collaboration? Are we doing a good job? Do we need to do more? Rebecca, your thoughts?
I mean, I would say the real-time real example right here is an example of collaboration. But to Abraham's point before, I think like the ecosystem and the new entrants are all bringing something unique to the table. And we're a firm believer that we can't build it all on our own. There's just no way. The pace at which things are changing, evolving, client demand, it requires creativity and innovation from all over. And so, for example, we have a public partnership that we've announced, that we've had in place with a company such as FiSpan, which allows us to offer integration with ERPs through our online experience to our clients. Like, we would not be able to build that like utility into the rest of the industry on our own. We needed to work with a partner, and that allows us to bring it to the market very quickly. So I just think that partnerships are going to be the foundation of innovation going forward. And you see it in all the news announcements that keep going across the news wires every week, that different companies are partnering to bring a new capability. And to me, that's just going to be the way that we do business. It does require that you strengthen your controls around the partners that you choose, who you choose to, like, some of those controls to make sure that you're comfortable with it. And of course, when you introduce different players into your own ecosystem, like, that's when cyber risk also heightens. And so having those controls in place, like, you can't understate that, but if you feel comfortable in your practices there, like, you have to have a mindset that partnerships are critical to continue to evolve.
Thanks. Abraham.
Thanks, Janet. Well, I think the thing with partnerships is that at its core, you need to have trust with your counterparties, right? Partnerships can only go so far as the extent of trust that you have with the organization that you're working with. And I think we've done a pretty good job over the last year with implementing policy to increase that trust. And the example I like to give is the RPAA. As a financial institution, when you're trying to work with an organization that has a capability that is more accretive to what you have, that where you can't build, I mean, the first thing you're going to go through is some sort of due diligence on your counterparty. And typically, based on existing guidelines, those are very laborious if you've gone through any of them. Challenging, if I were to add. So I think regimes like the RPAA, where you have Bank of Canada oversight on these potential partners to banks and credit unions, where you've implemented certain regulatory requirements, right? From an operational perspective, from an incident management perspective, from a fund safeguarding perspective, I think it opens the door to easier conversations in terms of having trust with the party you're doing business with. So I think when we lay the foundation of trust, whether that's consumers or whether that's organizations working with one another, I think you facilitate that evolution of partnership.
Thanks. And Kathleen?
Maybe I'll just add in two quick things. I think both Rebecca and Abraham have touched on, this future is not going to be any single party winning the show. It is going to be, where collaboration and ecosystems are the name of the game. One of the things that I would just say broadly that I'm seeing is I think the industry recognizes that is the case. There is lots of work being done in terms of picking partners and thinking about what is the path that's going to give them the most optionality, flexibility for the future. And that is of course important. But I think we have to recognize that in this world, there is not going to be one provider. There's not going to be one LLM model. There's not going to be, kind of one solution that is going to be, I think, a winner takes all. I think we are going to have to all operate in an environment that is very much about an open ecosystem. And so I think as the industry is thinking about kind of designing for the future, partnerships, collaboration, ecosystems, I think that there's a good job happening. What I see is recognition that that's, critical. But I also think there's real understandable hesitation just in terms of who's the partner that I pick for the future and how much does that commit me to a certain path. And none of us on this call, know what, in 12 months from now, what the world's going to look like in this space. So I would just say, one really important thing is we're thinking about this collaboration ecosystems, making sure that you have flexibility and choice by design built into how you are enabling that future. And then the second thing I would say is that I think Abraham touched on it, just security, fraud. When I think about collaboration and ecosystems, I think competition should stop at the security layer. Security needs to absolutely be a committed, and it is, but I think it's going to only accelerate a committed, shared, understanding and commitment from all of the players in terms of making sure that we are building the trust that the panelists have talked about, and security into every layer of what we're doing for this ecosystem.
Great, thanks. So we're going to open up the floor to audience Q&A in a moment. So please start submitting your questions in the Ask the Speaker box. And I'm going to close this portion of the discussion by asking each of our panelists, what is the biggest opportunity that you see on the horizon in payments? And Abraham, I'm going to go to you first.
I'll keep it quick, Janet. I think the biggest, at least intriguing point for me, as well as opportunity, is how conventional payment rails, as well as upcoming payment rails, are going to work in conjunction with new payment methods such as stablecoin, right? With the oversight under the Bank of Canada, I think the government's done a pretty good job in terms of telegraphing the potential of this type of payment product. And I'm curious to see how this is going to work with domestic payment schemes or cross-border payment methods. So I'm really interested to see how we as Canadians and the Canadian ecosystem can leverage these two payment rails.
Great. And Kathleen, next.
I think we've talked about it. I would say, the big opportunity here is just this convergence. We've been talking about it, real-time infrastructure, open data, agentic AI, like all of these things coming together is going to enable intelligent, embedded, inclusive payments, which means transactions can be optimized, they can be contextual, and also increasingly invisible. And so I think the real opportunity here is that institutions have to build for interoperability, trust, and embedded experience. I think those are going to be the critical components for shaping the next decade of payments.
Thank you. And Rebecca, biggest opportunities on the horizon?
Yeah, I would echo that around embedded ecosystem. We just launched something where we have a sandbox for all of our APIs that allows our clients and prospects to basically take BMO APIs and integrate it within their own experiences. And that's like the next level of innovation that is here. It's here very much so in the US, and it's coming to Canada at a fast rate. So I would say the embedded piece is one of the biggest things. And I would say also the obviously with the advent of stablecoin and tokenized digital assets, that is also something that a lot of Canadians and companies are thinking about what does that mean for their business models. And then finally, 24/7, we've talked about it in terms of payments, but you're starting to see announcements of business models moving 24/7. The New York Stock Exchange just announced some of their intentions, and that's really, I think, where the future is going and how companies choose to participate. They've got to be thinking about that, because if you move 24/7, that also means your service models need to be available in a different way, and it opens up a lot of different ways of thinking about how we do business.
Thank you. So we have a question from the audience, and I'm going to give this one to Kathleen. It's AI related, and then see if the others want to weigh in. But Kathleen, you talked a lot about the potential and around the use of AI in payments. But do you also see impediments related to the adoption of AI for payments that we have to overcome?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's probably a good call out to, we like to talk about the shiny new objects and the possibilities, but the reality is there is a lot of work that has to be done. I would say, I think most people on this call know this, but the limiting factor for AI adoption is not the tech. It's not the security. It's actually culture of an organization. And I know that sounds very fluffy, but we see it over and over again. So as people, organizations are trying to think about, and this applies to payments, as you're trying to think about how do you move quickly and securely down a path of extracting value for your organization because you're driving efficiencies or you're introducing new revenue streams for your customers, that requires a degree, like we've been talking about collaboration, but it requires a degree of clarity around the North Star. What are you trying to drive in terms of your business strategy? But it also requires collaboration internally in these organizations around just how do you govern this? And so, I would say just really making sure organizations are very, very clear around the role of business, the role of IT, the role of risk management in these organizations and how they are working together, aligned against the strategy, and then working through all of the very real issues that, we all need to solve. That is, I would say, the biggest thing. I know it's not an easy thing, but it's just time and time again, when we're in these large organizations and even in, some of the payment use cases that I've been seeing where we're doing some really innovative things that are going to drive real value. But it's also about making sure that getting everybody focused on alignment around how you're going to deliver that value.
Thanks, Kathleen. Anything that Abraham or Rebecca would like to add on that one?
I can add. Yeah, I think I can add on that, Janet. And we were kind of alluding to it earlier with, agentic opportunities. But I think the challenges there, or something that may limit adoption, is kind of frameworks around how do we remediate issues? Because inevitably something is going to go wrong, and we're going to have to determine who's on the hook for what. I mean, that is inherent to anything that has to do with the movement of money. And so I think one of the challenges there is lacking infrastructure, or rather a framework, I would say, be it that's legislative or voluntary, in terms of how we address customer issues if a payment goes wrong, if an agent makes the wrong payment, if an agent makes a payment more than they're authorized for. And so there's a variety of ways that this can go wrong. Now, I don't want to be, bringing up doom and gloom, but I think it may limit the adoption if we have too many situations where consumers are not in the best position and we don't have mechanisms to quickly redress those issues and quickly put them back, quickly make them whole again. I think that will be an issue potentially for adoption.
Can I add one comment, Janet? Because I see there's a question about how do you ensure there's trust in payments? And I think that's such an excellent question. And I'm just going to bring it to something that we spend a lot of time on, because no matter how much we modernize and move to real-time rail, we have to spend a lot of time with whoever's initiating that payment, because there's a lack of understanding that once you hit send, like, it could be gone. And so when you think about the companies that we work with, or even the consumer, making sure they understand the parameters of the payment rail they're using, as well as making sure they truly trust the instructions they're receiving. So when you think about scams, fraud, account takeovers, like that stuff still exists. People are still not calling back when they receive written instructions to make sure those written instructions are actually coming from someone that can be trusted. And so as we move to real-time payments, I think one of the biggest pieces we have to do as a industry is make sure that we're educating. We're educating whoever is actually initiating that payment what those parameters are. And if they accidentally send it somewhere that shouldn't be sent, what does that mean in terms of recourse? Because I do think that there's a lack of understanding. And when you think about some of the companies that are in the industry, like companies that we work with, I mean, they have new employees joining all the time that are accountable for some of these tasks in their organizations. And so how do you make sure that you have a really strong program that's educating those that are in charge of payments in any company?
Yeah,
I don't know
thanks.
if others agree with me on that point, but
Yeah, I would. And I think that, I mean, the question is really around, what are our organizations doing to help build and enhance trust in payments, and to enable adoption at scale. And I think we could also, and I agree with your comments completely, but I think we can also tie it to something that Kathleen said a little bit earlier, which is around when it comes to security and fraud, you have to leave competition at the table, right? And I think that that the collaboration is key in that domain as well. And that collaboration, when you have all of the players in the ecosystem working together to build strength in the area of fraud prevention, that builds trust, right? How about you, Abraham? Anything that you'd like to add about trust building and collaboration?
Janet, could not have said it better myself. Nothing to add.
All right.
Maybe I'll just add on one thing. I think that the industry is really trying to figure this out. So Microsoft, we have something called Azure Confidential Compute, the ability to have enclaves where nobody is seeing the data and you can run analytics and insights on top of that. And there has been some examples of partnership in the industry in terms of combating things like human trafficking or AML. And so I just think things like that, where Rebecca's so right. It's all about education. It's education of consumers, but it's also education for all of us, just in terms of understanding the risks of using some of this. And then once it's education, it is also then really trying to think about how do we all, as players in the Canadian ecosystem, how do we ensure that we are, both deriving our own individual value for our own organizations, but also protecting the entire ecosystem by experimenting in some of these things, where you can run some kind of analytics. You can also, have shared, fraud databases. There's lots of possibilities there, and I think that we have seen some of that, and there's, I think, only more to come.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much for all of the questions that you've put in the chat. And I want to also thank my co-panelists here for sharing their expertise. I think it's been an absolute pleasure and a really engaging conversation. So thank you to everybody. Payments Canada is looking forward to continuing this discussion on the future of payments at the 2026 Summit, which is taking place May 5th through 7th at the Automotive Building in Toronto. For those of you who can't make it to Toronto, our digital experience ticket just launched, which includes a live stream of our main stage and access to the community through the Summit app. And for those of you who can join us in person, we're happy to provide all participants today with a promo code to save on your registration. So thanks again, everybody, for your time and your interest, and have a great rest of your day.